Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of Vesuvius Town Council, Tuesday, September the 9th, 2025 at 9 a.m. in Council Chambers. So I first of all need the approval of the agenda, and I don't believe there are any late items. No, thank you. Could we have that? Myers, Councillor Myers, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Chong, all in favor. Thank you. And welcome, Councillor King. We thought this was going to be a quiet meeting, but we've changed our minds now. Jim likes to ask questions. We now need to do the adoption of the minutes, please, for the Committee of the Whole that was held on August the 12th, 2025. We have a motion, Councillor Poderica, Councillor Chong, all in favor. Thank you. All right, we have some staff reports today, several different things from our planner, Ms. Duong. And so the first one is the proposed amendments to the Delegation of Authority bylaw, number 1292. So please go ahead, Shannon.
Thanks so much. And I do have a quick PowerPoint to help support this. So I just wanted to start off by saying the first couple of items on the committee agenda today, there are two items that have arisen just through our experience in doing subdivision applications for the town. They're quite rare circumstances, but I'll go into more detail about them. And they've really just, this is really an opportunity, I think, to identify and potentially make some action on creating more efficient processes within the town. So the first item today relates to the strata title conversions. So under section 242 of the local government, or the Strata Property Act, that section of the act identifies local government councils are the quote unquote approving officer for the conversion of a previously occupied building into a strata unit. So when you say previously occupied, that really means it had been occupied for any purpose, whether it be residential, commercial, industrial, otherwise. And it's taking a multi-unit building that wasn't otherwise stratified and stratifying it into individual lots that can be sold off. So approving officers typically consider, from the strata context, bare land stratas. Building stratas don't typically require the approving officer to sign off on those plans, except for those that are stratified under section 242. So another subsection under this section of the Act also stipulates that council may, by resolution, delegate to an approving officer or other person the exercise of authorities and performance of the duties of the approving authority under this section. So similar to how council has the ability to delegate, let's say like the issuance of development permits to staff, council can delegate the authority to deal with strata title conversions to the approving officer or other staff. So just a bit of background, like I mentioned, strata title conversion requests are very rare. Typically when we see stratification of buildings, this happens just immediately following construction before occupancy. There's a number of challenges that come with converting building into a strata after it's been occupied, especially depending on how much time has lapsed between the construction of the building, adoption of new building code, et cetera, to the time that it ends up getting stratified. So we did a quick review of the town's records just to see how many of these requests that we've received. And it appears that we've only received about 3 of them since the Strata Property Act was amended back in 2000 to allow for the delegation of authority of strata title conversions. So while the land use procedures bylaw does have an application fee associated with strata title conversions, the bylaw doesn't actually set out any sort of processing procedures on how staff would deal with such a request. So just some considerations for council when considering whether or not to delegate this. Really, delegation of the authority to approve or refuse a strata title conversion to the approving officer. We do see this as a means of streamlining the strata title conversion process because it eliminates the overall need for the item to have to get prepared and scheduled for council consideration, which does take a bit of time to get the report together and then get the timing of the council meeting just right. So if council is supportive of the delegation of the Section 242 Strata Property Act authority, we would be proposing to put together an amendment bylaw for the land use procedures bylaw in order to introduce those processing procedures since they're currently absent, and also establish new application requirements for strata title conversions as they are somewhat unique in how they have to be considered as set out under the Strata Property Act. So with that in mind, we are asking for council's direction as to whether or not to initiate that amendment to the delegation of authority bylaw. And we are recommending that we do proceed down that route. But of course, council does have the option to maintain the status quo.
Thank you very much, Ms. Duong. So the recommendation is that the delegation of authority bylaw be initiated, not voted on today, just initiated, and it would then come back to council. Am I correct? Is there anyone who has any questions or concerns about this? Is there someone who would like to make the recommendation?
I'll move it.
Thank you. Councillor King. Councillor Chong is seconding that. All in favor? Thank you very much. So the next one is the delegation of council authority to approving officer from section 512, minimum parcel frontage on the Highway of Local Government Act. And that's Ms. Duong as well. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, this is another item that relates to kind of the subdivision process. This one specifically in relation to section 512 of the Local Government Act. This section of the act sets out that if a parcel being created by subdivision fronts onto a highway, so a roadway, the minimum parcel frontage on that highway must be the greater of 10% of the perimeter of the lot that fronts the highway, and the minimum frontage that the local government may by bylaw provide. So this authority to exempt a parcel from being subdivided from this requirement is granted to a local government. So councils have the authority just outright to make these decisions. However, the Act does also provide for a means of delegating this authority to an approving officer. So just a bit of background, the town does have zoning regulations that set out minimum parcel width. So in all zones, a parcel can't be created that is less than 25% of the depth of the parcel, but the zoning bylaw doesn't set out any requirements with respect to minimum frontage on a highway. Now, both minimum parcel width and minimum frontage requirements typically seek to avoid the creation of kind of odd shaped lots, typically narrow lots that don't have enough buildable area. Another thing that minimum parcel frontage also addresses is the provision of adequate road access to newly created lots, and that's not inherently addressed through minimum parcel width regulations. So minimum parcel width exemptions, those can be requested through our development variance permit process as it relates to a variance to a local government zoning bylaw provision. However, with minimum parcel frontage on a highway, that is actually a requirement under the Local Government Act. So it's seen to be a statutory requirement under the Act. And you can't use the same development variance permit process to vary that requirement. Therefore, a statutory exemption has to be sought. It's very similar to floodplain exemptions in that way. So just some considerations in terms of whether council wishes to delegate this authority. I think really the primary thing is that the approving officer is responsible for reviewing and approving or refusing subdivision applications. So when you get a minimum parcel frontage exemption, that's typically in regards to an ongoing subdivision application. So there's definitely a benefit of having the approving officer reviewing such an exemption request in the context of the subdivision application. It's also going to be reviewed along. Additionally, the delegation of authority for this type of exemption is generally seen to streamline the subdivision application process where these exemptions are required. Again, they're very rare, but having to have the extra step of going to council may add additional timing requirements to that subdivision application process, which tend to be quite lengthy to start with. And then we do see section 512 exemptions as being kind of technical exercises that staff can better resolve, which kind of frees council up to focus on some of the larger scale strategic land use issues that the town may be facing. Council does, of course, have the option to maintain its role in determining whether or not to provide these exemptions as maintaining this ability. would allow council to consider other things such as community priorities. So how minimum parcel frontage affects neighborhood character, whether it's being precedent setting and whether or not consistency is being taken in the approach to giving out these exemptions. And also it'd be helpful at times to have council's involvement in potentially controversial decisions. So with all of this in mind, we are asking for council's direction today, just with the options being that the bylaw number 1404, being the town of Vesuvius delegation of subdivision parcel frontage exemption bylaw be initiated, or that the status quo be maintained, and that council remain with that authority to decide on section 512 exemptions. And we are recommending option 1.
Thank you very much. Is it possible to have council decide on some that the approving officer feels should come to council? Is that an option? Might that be an option in the, when you initiate this? Or is this giving it totally to the approving officer and not to council? I just wondered if that was an option.
This would give it fully to the approving officer. I would have to look into it more. Typically, when delegation is given to staff or to an approving officer, if, let's say, the approving officer or staff were to refuse that, typically there's some sort of appeal process where that person can come to council and make a request to council to change it. But I'm not 100% sure for this particular type of delegation whether that exists.
Thank you. Mrs. Coulson, do you have any idea about this, or can it just be talked about when we look at this report again?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Knowing that that is council's wish to have that authority to review these when they wish, we can move forward with that understanding and see if there is a way to put that into what's coming back to council.
Just a suggestion. I'm not sure if anybody else has any other questions or concerns about this, or would like to move one of the options. No, go ahead, Councillor Chung.
I'll move option 1.
Thank you. And it's seconded. All right, anybody else? All in favor? Thank you very much. That's carried. All right, we will move on to the next, the zoning bylaw amendment, parcel coverage at Meadowlark Development. Ms. Duong.
Great, thank you. So I do apologize. I do have to bring up small scale multi-unit housing again.
Okay.
So just as a reminder, Bill 44 resulted in amendments to the Local Government Act that were related to the delivery of small scale multi-unit housing in the province. Shortly after these amendments were passed, the province had also released a policy manual and site standards document, and that was released in order to assist local governments in implementing small-scale multi-unit housing compliant zoning bylaws. The Local Government Act sets out that council, when you're developing or adopting these bylaws, you must consider the applicable guidelines, and those guidelines are the manual and site standards document. So the manual, it touches on a lot of things, but it does provide for a number of recommendations and approaches to zoning regulations, and that does include parcel coverage. The manual highlights that lot coverage limitations can overall impede small-scale multi-unit housing if you end up setting a value for lot coverage that doesn't allow for a large enough buildable area on parcels in order to accommodate the development forms that would be required for the multiple units, and also that are financially viable. So the manual sets out the recommended lot coverage. There's a number, they have a range that they've recommended, and this is based on the density requirements because they do vary based on different places and whether or not the transit-oriented areas are in place. So the recommended coverage for minimum, or an area that has a minimum of a single family dwelling plus a suite and or an accessory dwelling unit would be a 30% lot coverage. However, for an area that does require a minimum of 6 units to be provided, that would be a 60% lot coverage to accommodate that. Now, with our former zoning bylaw, in review of that, we did note that it didn't set out any sort of maximum parcel coverage requirement in any of the residential zones. And just because we weren't around for its development, it was unclear whether or not that was intentional or if it was just simply omitted. But now kind of fast forwarding to 2024, back when the Committee of the Whole was considering changes to the zoning bylaws part of the zoning bylaw update, staff had advised that the introduction of any parcel coverage regulation is going to represent a significant new regulation in residential zones, given that they were never there before. However, there was merit in establishing that type of requirement in what was being proposed as a new RS1 or a small scale multi-unit residential zone. And then, of course, in September 2024, Council did adopt the new zoning bylaw 1395, which established a 50% parcel coverage allowance in the RS1 zone. So one of the objectives of the former Southeast Meadowlark area plan was ultimately to expand the town's supply of much needed land for medium density housing and to serve for a mix of family and other household needs. One of the ways in which it did this was it used inclusionary zoning and form and character development permit area guidelines, and they did that in place of zoning regulations. So this ultimately resulted in the establishment of an intensive residential development or IRD zone to those properties within the Southeast Meadowlark area plan. And that zone was silent on building envelope requirements. So just some considerations for councils. When it comes to maximum parcel coverage requirements, that is what we would consider to be a very common zoning regulation throughout local governments throughout the province. And maximum parcel coverage works in conjunction with other types of building envelope provisions, such as setback requirements, building height requirements, floor area ratio, as a means of controlling the overall density and scale of buildings that you have being developed on individual lots. Parcel coverage regulations do address a number of issues, and that includes just the general prevention of overbuilding of sites, but while also setting a value that allows for reasonable development of these sites. Parcel coverage regulations also help to protect neighborhood form and character. They work to ensure adequate open space is being provided between properties. And it also assists in other ways, somewhat indirectly, with stormwater management and mitigating environmental impacts of development. Now, I suppose council is probably wondering why this is coming forward today. And a property owner within the Southeast Meadowlark development has recently raised concerns with respect to the applicable parcel coverage provisions that apply within Meadowlark, which is largely applied with a RS1 zone. So the property owner has requested a parcel coverage allowance of 70% to reflect what could have previously occurred under the former zoning bylaw. I do want to note that between receiving the request and today's committee meeting, so we do understand that the request of that 70% parcel coverage had reflected a calculated parcel coverage based on a review of proposed plans for the development of one of the other lots in phase 2 of Meadowlark. However, upon further review of these plans, we did note that the calculation was not accurate and that the proposed parcel coverage based on those plans was actually closer to that 50% that is currently required. So despite this, we do feel that council should have the opportunity to consider this original request should it find it appropriate to make any regulatory changes with respect to parcel coverage in the residential zones. So phase 1 of Meadowlark has already been built out, with phase 2 having partially been built out at this point, with a few lots having been constructed upon. Now, the development of the parcels within phases 1 and 2, after doing kind of a bit of a top-down mapping review, it appears that the parcel coverages of the existing development are around 50%, and those generally accommodate single detached dwellings. So in our review, we do believe that a 70% parcel coverage wouldn't be in line with the scale of what you currently see to be existing in the Meadowlark area. Additionally, in reviewing some of our neighboring local governments, we did note that the city of Penticton, the district of Summerland, as well as the town of Oliver allow maximum parcel coverages of 40 to 50% in their comparable residential zones. And As mentioned previously, the provincial manual recommends 60% for lots really only where a minimum of 6 units are being permitted. The town also has a medium density residential 1 zone, which is meant to accommodate multifamily residential developments such as townhouses and apartments, which require a minimum of 3 dwelling units per development. And that zone requires or permits a 50% parcel coverage as well. So with that in mind, we're not seen to be completely out of line with other local governments, the provincial manual, or really what we had been attempting to achieve to allow for the accommodation of additional dwelling units as part of SSMUH. I already covered that first point, but in general, what we do see is that 70% parcel coverage would generally be considered to be excessive and not really supported in a zone which currently only permits a maximum of 2 dwelling units. Of course, the town did receive the SSMUH compliance deadline extension just to the end of 2029. And we will eventually have to require, after that deadline has passed, or if the water infrastructure has been upgraded sooner, 3 to 4 dwelling units per parcel. So the 50% would likely be appropriate considering, as mentioned, that the RM1 medium density zone already permits 50% parcel coverage for larger scale developments. Additionally, the Southeast Meadowlark Plan had intended to incentivize a variety of housing types and forms. So council could consider an alternative to kind of this across the board parcel coverage increase and instead use a variable parcel lot coverage allowance in those situations where additional dwelling units are constructed. So as just an example, you could have a slightly lower parcel coverage allowance for single detached dwellings of, let's say, 40%, and then allow for 50% parcel coverage for duplex dwellings or potentially suite or single detached dwellings which have a secondary suite. As just a way of incentivizing greater density and usage of these sites. And lastly, council does have an option to introduce a maximum parcel coverage of 70%, of course, to the entirety of the Southeast Meadowlark former plan area, which would allow for the construction of larger dwelling units in general. So just in summary, we did receive that request to increase parcel coverage allowances to 70% for the Meadowlark Phase 2 development. But council is being asked to consider those 3 options. The first being to maintain the status quo. The second being to initiate zoning amendments that would provide for a variable parcel coverage allowance. Or lastly, to initiate a zoning amendment that would allow for an across the board 70% increase in Southeast Meadowlark. And we are supportive of option 1 in this case to maintain the status quo given the comments previously provided. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Duong. That you explained it very well. I thought it was interesting that the houses in Meadowlark 1 are all at about 50%, and the ones that have already been built are the same in Meadowlark 2. Am I correct? No, you said. Okay, thank you. Council, anybody have anything to add or suggest here? Councillor King.
Yeah, I just wondered if we change this, if we chose, say, option 2, was this impact other zonings in town or just the Meadowlark?
I believe that one was just meant to be focused within Meadowlark. But of course, council does have the option, I think, to expand that to just the overall RS1 zone throughout the town. It's just that the focus of this particular discussion today was with respect to Meadowlark.
Okay, Councillor King?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll move option 2. I mean, we are trying to get more development, so maybe a duplex would be fine. Just my input.
So option 2 is 40% for a single, 50% when it's duplex. Is that the one you're referring to? What, anybody else? Is anybody wanting to second that? Okay, that was not seconded. Is there, and does anybody have anything else that they would like to recommend? Go ahead, Councillor
Thank you, Your
Poderica.
Worship. I move option 1 at this time, an amendment to the zoning bylaw to increase maximum parcel permitted at large not be initiated.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Bennett. Anybody? Go ahead, Councillor Chong.
Thank you. So earlier in your presentation, you mentioned there was a discrepancy in calculation. Could you clarify what that discrepancy was?
I can try my best. I wasn't the person, unfortunately, who did the review of the plan, so I don't know exactly what went into the calculation. However, I understand that the original calculation came out to be around 70%. However, upon reviewing it against what our zoning bylaw requires to be included as part of parcel coverage calculations, which doesn't include the roof overhang. Typically, you just kind of go from the exterior walls and include cantilevers and decks. It ended up coming out to be closer to the 50% allowance, albeit slightly over. I do know that there were a couple of plan changes, so there could have been discrepancy at that point. However, yeah, I'm unable, unfortunately, to get the specifics for you on that one.
And also to follow up, with the percentage calculation, that includes all the setbacks and offsets and everything like that, right?
So parcel coverage calculations would be in relation to the entirety of the parcel. So like if you have a 400 square meter parcel and you have a 50% coverage, you get 200 square meters.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, so it has been moved and seconded that we go with option 1 and that this amendment not be initiated. I will call the question. Sorry, you had something else. Go ahead.
So the reason why we don't want to increase the maximum parcel coverage is 70% from the reasons that were in the presentation, one of which is stormwater mitigation. I mean, our precipitation here is low. And then also our goal is to limit water consumption, right? So if we can have larger parcel coverage, then arguably that means less space for landscaping and whatnot. We could also support water conservation strategies. Are there any other municipalities that have that 70% maximum parcel coverage?
From our review, not that I'm aware of. I mean, even in, I was looking at like the city of Kelowna, for example, you would see the 60% parcel coverage, I believe, applied to higher density developments or higher density residential zones.
And then also you mentioned it was about 50-ish. So is the 50% a hard number, or is there a standard deviation of like a little give and take here?
50% is a hard number. If you go over, you need a development variance permit.
Gotcha.
Councillor King?
Yeah, if this gets passed, can he put a basement suite in these houses?
Yes, so a basement suite or the inclusion of a basement suite wouldn't be impacted necessarily by parcel coverage allowances.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask for a vote on this, please. It's been moved and seconded that we go with the recommended vote. All in favor? Against? Thank you. That was 3-2, so it's carried. Thank you very much. And I believe that's all that we have. So could I have a motion to terminate the meeting, please? Thank you. Councillor Poderica, Councillor Chong, all in favor?